Sarah Calloway had learned one thing in her 24 years of life. Never draw attention to yourself. Keep your head down. Do your work. Leave quietly. It was a rule she had carried like a stone in her chest for as long as she could remember, and it had kept her safe. Until the day she walked through the iron gates of the Blackthorn estate, and everything she had carefully built around herself began to fall apart. The estate sat at the edge of the northern mountains like a warning. It was enormous and dark, and beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Stone walls stretched toward a gray sky. Black iron lanterns lined the long entrance path. The trees on either side stood so tall and so close together that the sunlight barely reached the ground beneath them. Sarah had stood at the gate for almost a full minute before she made herself walk forward. She needed this job. She had no choice. The head housekeeper, a tall woman named Mrs. Voss, met her at the door with a clipboard and a pair of sharp eyes that seemed to measure Sarah from head to toe in a single second. "You are the new hire," Mrs. Voss said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "You will speak only when spoken to. You will not enter any room on the 3rd floor. You will not go near the east wing after dark. And you will never, under any circumstances, enter the Alpha King's private study." She paused. "Do you understand?" Sarah nodded. She understood perfectly. She was given a uniform, a small room in the servants' quarters, and a schedule that began at 5 in the morning. She did not complain. She folded her sleeves down to her wrists, the way she always did, smoothed her hair back, and told herself that this was fine. This was manageable. She had survived worse. Her first morning passed without incident. She cleaned 3 hallways, polished 2 staircases, and kept her eyes on the floor whenever anyone walked past. She was good at being invisible. She had spent her whole life practicing it. And then she made a mistake. It was not a large mistake. She had simply misread her assignment sheet. Room 304 was supposed to be a sitting room on the 3rd floor, which she was already not supposed to be on. But in her tiredness and the unfamiliar layout of the estate, she had turned left instead of right, pushed open the wrong door, and stepped directly into the private study of Alpha King Damien Blackthorn. She realized her error in the same moment. She realized the room was not empty. He was standing at the window with his back to her, speaking in a low and controlled voice into the phone pressed to his ear. He was tall, taller than she had expected, with dark hair and broad shoulders, and the kind of stillness that did not feel like calm. It felt like the moment before something broke. She should have backed out immediately. She tried to, but her elbow caught the edge of a small display table near the door, and a glass artifact, old, delicate, clearly irreplaceable, tipped forward and shattered against the stone floor. The sound was enormous in the silence. Damien stopped speaking mid-sentence. He did not turn around right away. That pause, that single, terrible pause, was worse than anything Sarah had ever experienced. When he finally turned, his eyes were the color of frozen steel, pale gray and completely still, and they settled on her with the kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. He ended the call without a word to the person on the other end. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. "That belonged to my mother," he said. His voice was low and even. There was no shouting, no raised tone, just those 5 words, landing like stones dropped into still water. Sarah opened her mouth. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to say something, but he raised one hand slightly, and the words died in her throat. "You are dismissed," he said. "Collect your things. You are no longer employed here." Mrs. Voss appeared in the doorway, as if she had been summoned by the silence itself. She placed a hand on Sarah's arm and guided her out of the room before Sarah had the chance to speak a single word in her own defense. 30 minutes later, Sarah stood outside the estate gates with her small bag on her shoulder and the cold mountain air against her face. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying did not change anything. She simply stood there for a moment, looking at the road ahead, and tried to figure out her next move. Then the sky opened. The storm came in fast and without mercy. Rain hit the mountain road so hard it turned to white noise, and within minutes the path down the slope was running with water. The security guard at the gate, a young man who looked genuinely uncomfortable, made a phone call, listened for a moment, and then turned to her with an apologetic expression. The road's flooded below the second ridge, he said. Protocol says we can't let anyone travel in these conditions. You'll have to come back inside until it clears. Sarah almost laughed. She picked up her bag and walked back through the gates. She was placed in a small room in the servants' quarters, the same one she had slept in the night before, and told to stay there until morning. She was given a meal she barely touched and a blanket she wrapped around her shoulders, while she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. She did not sleep for a long time. When she finally did, the dreams came. They always came when she was stressed, vivid and strange and full of shadows that moved like living things. She ran through dark trees in her dreams. She heard sounds that were not quite human. She felt something pulling at her chest, like a rope tied around her heart, tugging her towards something she could not see. She woke in the middle of the hallway. It had happened before, the sleepwalking, but never this far from a bed. She was standing in the east corridor, barefoot on cold stone, her heart hammering, her left sleeve pushed up past her elbow, where she must have shoved it in her sleep. The mark on her inner forearm was visible. It always frightened her when she saw it, not because it hurt, but because she had never been able to explain it. It had been there since childhood, raised slightly, like a scar, but shaped too precisely to be accidental. A circular design, layered with lines she had never been able to identify. Her legs gave out beneath her. She heard running footsteps before the darkness took her. When she opened her eyes, she was in a room she did not recognize, large, warm. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever slept on. A fire burned in the stone fireplace across from her, and Damien Blackthorne was standing near the door with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that she could not read at all. She sat up quickly, which was a mistake. The room tilted. "Don't," he said. Just that one word. She stopped moving. A man she didn't recognize, older, with kind eyes and a doctor's bag, was sitting in the chair beside her bed. He gave her a small nod. "You fainted. You are not injured. Please rest." She looked at Damien. He was looking at her arm. She pulled her sleeve down. Something moved across his face. Fast, controlled, but there. She had the strange feeling that she had just confirmed something he had already seen. "Who are you?" he asked. "I told Mrs. Voss everything during my interview,"
Sig.
she said carefully. "Tell me." So she did. She kept it short because there was not much to tell. She had grown up in a foster family in a small town 2 hours south of the territory border. Her foster parents had been kind, but had never known anything about where she came from. She had been left at a community building as an infant, with nothing but a blanket and a name written on a piece of paper, Sarah. No last name. Calloway was the family name she had taken later. She told him about the healing, how cuts closed faster on her than they should, how she had once broken her arm at 14, and the doctor had been confused when the X-ray came back nearly normal 3 days later. She had always explained it away. People believed what was easy to believe. She did not tell him that the pull toward the Northern Territories had started 2 years ago. That something in her chest had simply begun pointing north like a compass needle, steady and insistent, until she had finally followed it. That the estate, this estate, specifically, had been the point at which the pull had stopped. As if she had arrived somewhere she was always supposed to be. She kept that part to herself. Damien listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment and then left the room without a word. She did not see him again until the following evening. In the hours between, she learned things from the quieter staff members who brought her meals and checked on her with careful curiosity. She learned that the estate had not had a Luna, a female alpha figure, for over 10 years, since Damien's mother had passed away. She learned that Damien had never shown interest in the concept of a fated mate. She learned that the mark on her arm, which one young servant girl had glimpsed before Sarah pulled her sleeve back down, had caused a quiet storm of whispered conversations in the lower floors of the estate. She was starting to understand that she was in the middle of something much larger than a maid position. When Damien returned, he sat across from her in the chair the doctor had used. He did not look like a man who sat in chairs often. He looked like a man who was making himself be still when everything in him wanted to move. He told her about the mark. He told her what it meant. In their world, in his world, which she was only now beginning to understand was also hers. He told her about fated mates and the lunar bond, and what her mark signified to every wolf in this territory. He said all of it in the same flat, controlled tone he used for everything, as if he were reading from a report, as if it did not affect him. But his hands, resting on his knees, were pressed together, just slightly too hard. Sarah was quiet for a long time after he finished. "You fired me yesterday," she said finally. Something shifted in his expression. "Yes. And now you're telling me the universe has decided we're connected." That is one way to describe it. She looked at him steadily. "What do you want to do about it?" He was not expecting that question. She could tell. Most people probably did not ask Damien Blackthorne what he wanted. They waited to be told. He said, "I don't know yet." It was possibly the most honest thing he had said to her. She was still processing everything when his investigator arrived 2 days later with a file that changed the shape of her entire life in a single conversation. Her mother had been a she-wolf from a pack called the Auryn, a mid-sized, well-respected group that had been completely destroyed 17 years ago by a coalition of rogue forces with ties to a rival alpha in the south. Sarah had been hidden among humans by a pack elder who had escaped the attack. The elder had died the following winter. No one had known where the child was sent. Sarah had simply vanished from the record. Her mother had been a close ally of the Blackthorne family. Damien received this information in his study alone. Sarah heard later, from the housekeeper, that he had been very still for a very long time afterward. He came to her that night without an announcement. He stood in the doorway of the guest room and looked at her in a way he had not allowed himself to look at her before, without the careful blankness he wore like armor. There was something behind his eyes that was quiet and difficult and honest. He did not apologize. She did not expect him to. But he said, "You should have been protected," and the weight behind those words was enough. She looked at him for a moment. "I protected myself," she said. "I'm still here." She watched something move through him at that, something that was not quite relief and not quite pain, but lived in the space between the two. 3 days later, a message arrived from the south. The rival Alpha, a man named Crest, known for his cruelty and his patience, had learned of Sarah's presence. His message was precise and deliberate. If Damien would not formally claim his fated mate before the next full moon, Crest would come to collect her himself. He framed it as concern for an unclaimed wolf without a pack. Everyone understood what it actually was. A power move. A threat dressed in formal language. The full moon ceremony took place on a clear night at the edge of the forest that bordered the estate's northern wall. Every member of the Blackthorne pack stood in a wide circle around the open ground, silent and watchful. The air was cold and sharp. The moon was enormous overhead, so bright it turned everything silver and black. Damien stood at the center. Sarah stood beside him. She had made her decision 2 days before, in the quiet of the morning, alone and clear-headed and certain. Not because of the bond, not because of history or debt or destiny, but because she had spent 24 years being somewhere she was not wanted, and for the first time in her life, she was choosing to stand somewhere on her own terms. Damien spoke the words of the claim. His voice was steady and carried across the gathered pack without effort. Sarah stood straight beside him, her left sleeve rolled up, the mark on her inner forearm visible to everyone. In the moonlight, it was glowing, faintly, barely, but unmistakably. Several members of the pack made sounds she could not interpret. Some lowered their heads. Crest arrived at the territory border with his people 2 days later. He found a united pack waiting for him. He found a Luna standing at the Alpha King's side. He found the mate bond completed and settled, and entirely beyond his reach. He left before nightfall. The estate was quieter after that. The tension did not disappear overnight. It never does, in the real world. But it loosened. Things shifted slowly, the way large things do. Damien did not become easy to know. Sarah did not become someone who needed him to be. But in the hours between midnight and morning, when the estate was dark and still, they existed in the same space without armor, and that was more than either of them had expected. She had come to the estate with a bag and a rolled-down sleeve, and a rule about never drawing attention to herself. She stayed because she chose to, and that made all the difference.